In 1991, as the Soviet Union dissolved into 15 different countries, a tiny republic in the Caucasus Mountains declared it was leaving too. Under the command of a former Soviet Air Force general named Jokhar Dudayev, this nascent militia captured the world's imagination. They were widely seen as a courageous, ragtag insurgency standing up to a massive, nuclear-armed empire. This chart shows the absurd imbalance of power at the dawn of the First Chechen War. On one side, the million-strong Russian military apparatus. On the other, the Chechen starting inventory, built from looted depots, 108 armored carriers, and 24 artillery pieces. Yet they used those assets with devastating efficiency. By mastering local terrain and hit-and-run tactics, they bottlenecked the massive Russian convoys. Moscow retaliated. Over the next decade, 2 brutal wars leveled the region. The romantic ideal of a mountain rebellion was buried under millions of tons of shattered concrete. The fighters who survived Grozny's obliterated neighborhoods learned to fight block by block, room by room. The crucible forged a generation of incredibly capable, hardened urban combatants. They possessed a legendary fighting spirit, but their physical homeland was entirely destroyed. Their infrastructure was gone, the population decimated, and the military entity faced a biological choice: find a deeply pocketed patron or cease to exist entirely. The pivot toward survival came from Ramzan Kadyrov, a chief mufti who calculated that the ongoing independence movement was a suicide pact. He brokered a cynical, highly pragmatic deal. The Chechen leadership offered total submission and loyalty to the Russian Federation. In exchange, they received billions in reconstruction funds and the autonomy to govern their territory exactly as they pleased. When Ahmad was assassinated in 2004, his son Ramzan inherited both the political throne and the military machine, consolidating the fighters into his own personal enforcement division. Ramzan structured this force like a medieval royal guard. He placed his relatives in key command positions and began grooming his teenage children to eventually assume absolute control over the state's armed forces. The National Liberation Force was officially dead. In its place stood a privately operated, heavily armed Praetorian Guard, funded by Russian tax rubles and designed exclusively to protect the Kadyrov family dynasty. With their absolute authority secured by Moscow, the Kadyrovsi turned their hardened combat skills inward against their own people. International monitors documented systematic kidnappings, illegal killings, and the operation of torture facilities targeting political dissidents, journalists, and LGBTQ individuals. This tree shows the 1991 independence spirit fracturing. Kadyrov's loyalist branch dominates the center, while a scattered blue branch broke away, refusing Moscow's deal. These exiled veterans formed the armed forces of Ichkeria, scattering across Europe as a government in exile, waiting to reclaim their home. The military entity effectively split its own psyche. Its original, rebellious soul survived in exile, while its terrifying physical might served the very empire it was built to destroy. In 2022, that physical might was unleashed on a global scale. Moscow tapped the Chechen loyalists to act as an aggressive shock force in Ukraine. Approximately 70,000 Chechen fighters deployed into the theater, bringing their brutal brand of urban warfare into a conventional interstate conflict. But the invasion triggered a tragic family reunion. The exiled Ichkerian forces officially resurrected their units, embedding with the Ukrainian military. In the ruins of cities like Bakhmut, the Chechen dynasty is literally shooting at itself. Back home, Ramzan Kadyrov manages the war effort as a heavily curated media campaign. He constantly films himself and his forces firing weapons, projecting an aura of invincibility to serve Moscow's propaganda needs and masking the fratricidal reality on the ground. Now, that heavily armed proxy force is looking beyond Ukraine. Amidst the escalating conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran, Chechen commander Apti Alaudinov has publicly entered the fray. He stated that units loyal to Kadyrov are staged and fully prepared to deploy into Iran the moment U.S. or Israeli forces attempt a limited ground invasion of Iranian territory. The Chechen leadership isn't framing this potential intervention as a political favor to Vladimir Putin. They are broadcasting it as a religious jihad, a literal battle of good versus evil against Western forces. A militia born in the mountains in 1991 to fight for its own independence now sits at the edge of the Middle East. It proves that if you break a rebel force and purchase the loyalty of its leaders, you can engineer a multi-headed proxy army fully willing to pull the trigger on a wider, global war.